Hello and welcome to this maiden edition of lectures on the Legend column via YouTube. I am Sheku Putka Kamara. For the very first edition, today we're speaking on professional public relations practice and quality agenda setting. Stay with me for the next 30 minutes. So for starters, first things first. When we talk the professional practice of public relations, it is of essence to have an understanding of what public relations is all about. However, in the field of media and communications and the social sciences, hardly would you have universal definitions. By that I mean a range of scholars would always propound a range of perspectives. What is of importance is to understand what these various perspectives tend to focus on and how best we appreciate their arguments. So a universal argument about public relations was actually coined by the PRSA, otherwise known as the Public Relations Society of America. To them, they did see public relations as a strategic communications process that is aimed at establishing what they refer to as a mutually beneficial relationship between the organization and the general public. If we go by that conclusion, we are suggesting that public relations principles are required to go by strategicness. Strategicness in this case talks about factuality, truthfulness, and valid postulations. In quality agenda setting, we are suggesting that there should be no room to misinform the public. Now, some of my arguments about public relations actually go beyond strategic agenda setting. I could remember in some of my postulations, I did ask a question that how do I want the public to see my institution or organization? To me, the answer to that is what I call public relations, because I argue that no sober public relations person would want to see the name of his institution in the bad books of the public. So the trend of making your institution appear gregarious or appear very well is what PR people should focus on. But I further the argument that if your institution is wrong, your duty is to admit and defend, and not to embark on falsity and propaganda agenda setting. Because by that, you are misinforming people and you are saying that which is not right. Now, in ideal communications principles, we would always argue that the duty of a communicator is to get the facts right. And the golden rule of journalism and communications, according to Ken Mesler, would suggest to you that the duty of the journalist is to get the facts right, and the golden rule is to allow the people and facts to speak for themselves. So as a public relations person, you would realize that you are not doing a job for yourself. You are doing a job for your institution. And chances are you want to attain the three fundamental public relations objectives: visibility, acceptability, and credibility. You attain visibility by setting an agenda. But in the professional practice of public relations, we are saying that agenda must always be truthful and factual. But in a case where your agenda is not in line with what is expected of what you should do, then that could question your credibility. And the argument is saying you cannot get acceptability if what you're saying is not factual. Because chances are, no matter how you look at it, man by nature is a political animal. We all may have our own perceptions, we all may have our own conceptions, but when it comes to agenda setting, it is accepted for you to say what is right and not what is wrong. That is why in some of my discourses, I would always say, what is right and that which is wrong is wrong. However, you will realize that in society, we may have leftist and rightist perspectives. By rightist perspectives, you would have people that would uphold collaborative and facilitative notions. By leftist perspectives, you would have people that would want to uphold radical notions. To them, nothing good is worth talking about. To them, it is about ensuring that the watchdog will take an even more deeper approach. But in the context of understanding the practicalities of public relations, we should realize that the theoretical and practical compositions are really important. And I'll tell you why. On a global scale, we would always argue that for you to even call yourself as a public relations person, you must have at least a first degree in public relations. In America, in the UK, you cannot practice as a public relations officer if you do not have a degree in public relations. So sometimes when I make arguments about Sierra Leone, we are a bit constrained as a nation Because on a theoretical note, for you to say you have a public relations society in any nation, first of all, you should have an association of public relations officials. In Sierra Leone, we do not have that. In an ideal situation, the officials in public relations must have an institution that regulates what is right and what is wrong. Like we have journalism. No matter how you talk about the challenges of journalism in Sierra Leone, we have the Sierra Leone Association of Journalists, SLAJ. We have the Independent Media Commission, IMC, that has a responsibility of regulating what journalists do and not. And so that is why even when the IMC was established, you would realize that there was a focus on regulating the print, the electronic, and the advertising section. So that goes to tell you that you cannot do things unregulated. Even the 1991 Constitution of Sierra Leone provides for the right to freedom of expression and of the press, but it goes with limitations. But when you look at public relations, we do not have all of those laws. What we more or less have in Sierra Leone are individualistic PR practitioners who will do things for themselves in the interest of their institution and sometimes for their very selves. But at the end of the day, they are not regulated by anybody because there is no society or no association of public relations people. Because we do not have the association, you will realize that there are no codes of conduct or no codes of practices for public relations people. There are no set requirements as to who should be a PR person or not. That is why if you look at certain ministries, departments, and agencies, even though they tend to purport people that act as public relations people or communications people or media persons, you will realize that most, if not all of them, would hardly boast of any communication, PR, or media degree. And so that tends to question whether they really have the proclivity and sanctity to set quality agendas. Because when you talk quality agenda setting, you must first of all have an understanding of what you say. Normally I tell people, if you do not have an understanding of what you're saying, how would you expect other people to have an understanding of that which you may have said? So it has to start from the basics. If you're going to set an agenda, let there be truthfulness. Now, there's a public relations process, as outlined by John Marston, that I would like to talk on, which is the RACE acronym. Every PR practitioner must understand the value of research. By research, you want to ask yourself a few questions. What is the situation? When did it start? We would always argue that the answers to that would help you to take strategic, policies and decisions before taking the next action. That is why after research, the next thing that comes to mind is action. What action are you going to take as a result of the research that you have conducted? And then the C talks about communication. You only communicate the action that you have taken based on the research you did on the tape. And then lastly, evaluation, an assessment of the entire process. How best are you going to assess yourself? How willing are you to understand a strategic SWOT analysis? Because when I say strategic SWOT analysis, it's not just about understanding the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities, and threats. It's about understanding that what you're saying is correct and that it makes sense to you. So I'd always say this: an uneducated person would hardly not have the penchant to educate people. In like manner, in public relations, I have always argued that there is a need for you to have an understanding of the theoretical and practical conceptions before you set quality agenda. But again, it all boils down to management. Now, in some of my discourses, I would always say, if we argue that among other things, management has to be about the utilization of available resources for the attainment of predetermined objectives, you ask yourself, what are these objectives? In management terms, you always need the money, you need the manpower, you need the machinery, and you need the means. One of the challenges of public relations, not just in Sierra Leone, but on a global scale, I'll tell you, has to do with the inefficiency in not being part of top management. Management requires 3 levels: the top management, the middle management, and the lower management. We find ourselves in a situation where most people that are practicing public relations, first of all, do not have the foggiest of idea about what management is about. So sometimes, in doing what they do best, without understanding what management really is, it questions what they do. Top management in any institution has a focus of making strategic decisions. If PR people are not part of top management, my question is, how are they going to be in a position of understanding and relating well with the publics? Because in PR, you're talking 2 kinds of publics: the internal publics and the external publics. Internally, you are talking about people within the institution, and externally you are talking about people outside the institution. But an understanding of the policies of the institution and the management doctrines would actually guarantee that what you say is right and that it makes sense to a whole lot of what you're doing. So I would want to hold the lecture here and go for a short break. Alright, welcome back from that short break. I welcome you to the second half of a special discussion on the legend column. So I want to further the discussions on practical standpoint as far as hearing is concerned. Many a time when you talk a research of any nature, the scope and limitation is always of importance. Whilst public relations is practiced globally, we can argue that whilst in the US or the UK they have their set institutions that regulate PR practices like the PRSA or the UK Association of PR Professional Public Relations Practitioners, we have already said that it is not the case in Sierra Leone. And so that already means that we have a long way to go. By that we mean we need to get to a situation where we have the practitioners that we already have, we have the institutions that regulate what practitioners do, and of course, having individuals realizing that they cannot just say what they feel like saying. Because sometimes I would say this, what obtains in a country like Sierra Leone insofar as agenda setting is concerned, is that even where there are regulations, I see more of libertarian doctrines where people say whatever they feel like saying to please their paymasters. You are either for the system or against the system. You are either a part of the government or an opposition. So where that happens, you realize that people are doing things to encourage those fingers that feed them. And where that is the case, it is questioning journalistic accuracy, balance, and clarity. Because when you talk public relations, it is a communications principle. In a case where the communications principle is not accurate, then nothing is important again. Because, like I have always said, if what you're saying does not make sense to you, how would it possibly make sense to some other people? So to me, there's a long way to go insofar as professional public relations practice is concerned. We all have a responsibility to ensure that we understand the theoretical and practical standpoints. By that I mean, when you know that what I am doing is right and that it is not correct, then it will place you in a better position. But when you know that this is wrong and you're still bent on setting a wrong agenda, then you are not only disturbing yourself, but you're also disturbing your institution. And when I did speak about visibility, acceptability, and credibility, if your institution is not accepted, chances are your messages are questionable. If your institution has not attained credibility, chances are your agenda setting function is not functional. And so that is a key strategy in ensuring that what you say makes sense to you. There will always be challenges, but like I mentioned, when your institution is wrong, you have a duty to admit and defend. You don't have a responsibility to defend the indefensible. People would say you cannot bite the finger that feeds you. This is where management comes in. If you're a part of the top management of the institution, you would understand and know when strategic decisions are taken and or are being made. So when you go out to set the agenda, you will be speaking from an informed perspective. You would not go out to make suppositions and propositions that are baseless and founded. So that is why all of us really have to make efforts. I am not saying it is a crime to speak for your institution, but I am saying speak on an informed perspective and set an agenda that would bring quality. Because when you make a name for yourself, it is not just about individualistic sanctification that you will get, but your institution will also go in a long way of being part of the top class institutions. There will be classical examples in society. You ask certain people, what institution would you say is doing a very good public relations strategy or practice? You would have people suggest ABC. And if you say what institution is doing a negative public relations strategy, people would also suggest ABC. So to avoid all of those complications, let us try as best as possible to go in for the theoretical and practical compositions to make sure that the agenda we set is right and that it makes sense to us and to the rest of the society. It is on those bases that we begin to set a quality agenda and that society will be very proud of. So once again, I want to thank you all for spending time with me for the very first edition of the Legendary Column Lectures on YouTube.